Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast, where we inspire you to pursue your passion to gain time and financial freedom through opportunities in real estate. I'm your host, Mike Swenson. Let's get some real freedom together. All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Real Freedom Podcast. And I am so excited about our guest today. Somebody with just a kindred spirit of, my mission and what I want to be able to show on this podcast. And today we've got Michael Dominguez here. And what makes Michael special is, he has been a realtor. He's been doing investments over the last 15 years or so. He's a member of the REmax Hall of Fame and founder of Doors to Wealth Real Estate Group. And so started in real estate in 2008, bought your first investment property and have added to your portfolio since then. And then exciting news for you, you've got a book out, Armchair Real Estate Millionaire, and really just taking the lessons that you've learned and compiling that to help people build wealth through real estate, which is exactly what this podcast is about. So welcome, Michael. We're so excited to have you on. Why don't you just take a couple minutes and share a little bit more?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. Actually, great introduction, by the way. I should record that and just use that from now on. That's fantastic. So you actually nailed it. I as a second career or third career, I went into real estate, not really knowing where my future was going to go with that. Within about a year or so, I was focusing mainly on working with investors. And I was seeing.
Can I back up just a half step here? So what did you do before you got into real estate?
Sure. I was actually selling franchises for a pet food franchise here in Canada and the United States, but I was the franchise coordinator for this particular company. And so I did have a fair bit of experience working with business owners. And so using the term kindred spirits, a good phrase, because I found my people when I started going into real estate, and I saw a lot of business people that were building wealth through real estate. And that's really how it all began, as I was focusing on working with them. And then fast forward even just a few months, I was realizing, heck, if they could do it, I could do it. And the first property or two that I purchased, to be honest, weren't necessarily the type of properties that I'm advocating today. As a matter of fact, I've sold those properties. And honestly, part of my mindset for even investing was to make myself a better realtor, thinking I had more credibility. Little did I know, as much as that was great, it was the long-term wealth and success and freedom changes that happened as a result of investing in real estate. And to make a long story short, I started to make that my number one focus. I created a real estate team, and we focused on working with investors. And we became known in our community as being the go-to experts for working with investors. A lot of my success came on real estate tours and sort of, back in the day where you could actually shake hands with people and take people on tours and stuff like that. I used to have groups of 20 and 30 people going around from home to home. And so a lot of that information and education that we provide in the tours, I basically put into this book. And so I could pass it on to the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I like, what you were saying in terms of, seeing the benefit of buying those investment properties. And I think people also have to understand that it can, some people do things quickly and some people don't. But if you just had, whether it's a goal of a property a year or property every 2 years, maybe your first couple of years, you start out slow like that, but then it's like pushing a snowball down a hill. So it's going to gain momentum and it's going to gain steam as you build some more wealth. Now you have more wealth to put down on future properties, or you have more knowledge and experience to bring other people in. So I think sometimes what might prevent people from getting started is just thinking like, oh, I've got to be like so-and-so and buy 5 properties this year. And I don't have the time, or I don't have the knowledge, or I don't have the whatever it is, but it just starts with 1. And 1 can go to 2 and 2 to 3, or it can go from 2 to 4 to 8 to, 16 pretty quickly, but you got to get started.
Well, absolutely. And one of the things I talk about in my book is I'm not necessarily focused on the people that have 8 and 15 properties. That's awesome if you do, but just as little as 2 or 3 properties can change one's life. And actually some of the success stories I chose were with intention, were with people with as little as 2 or 3 properties, because 2 properties for a young couple, plus their own principal residence, can make a huge difference. There was this one couple that they were just basically got married, had a child, and they were thinking, how the heck am I going to pay for this kid's education later on in life? Then they thought about, geez, I could refinance one of my investment properties 15, 17 years from now, and his entire education is paid for. That's the power of real estate. And that's a success story. You don't necessarily need to be a full-time job to actually make a real difference through real estate.
Yeah, and that example was actually my experience. So we had bought our first townhouse when we got married, right as the market crashed in 2006. And so I tell people I was so excited because we bought it for less than it was bought when it was a new construction 2 years before that. So I was like, oh, we're getting a good deal. And then I watched as the market went down, and the value of it ended up being about half of what we bought it for. And so I was stuck, and we wanted to start a family. And so we were looking to build potentially go buy another house. And so long story short, I ended up renting that townhouse. And I remember doing the math, like I had a 30-year spreadsheet here of my mortgage payment, how much of the principal got paid down every month. And then I would put in, I'm a spreadsheet nerd, if you couldn't tell from my story here. And then I had another column of appreciation, like what if it appreciated at X? And then I calculated out, like, how many years would it take to break even? But then how much money am I making each month on just on principal reduction and appreciation? And so seeing that little incremental gain month by month by month, and then you fast forward, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, that was my goal, is, okay, this townhouse now can pay for my son's education when he, graduates, because we bought it and we ended up refinancing to a 20-year mortgage. So that's where, 20 years, I think we moved out of it maybe a year or two before he was born. So, that timing lines up, but that's a real tangible example. And I think it helps people to set a kind of a forced deadline of how to get started. When you can tie a property to a real life event like that, like being able to pay for somebody's education, or if you're retiring and want to retire in so many years, it's like, okay, if I have this mortgage, now this could be, help to fund my retirement. I think it gets people off the ledge a little bit and willing to jump in and take that risk that seems to hold so many people up.
100%. And the other thing that scares so many people is, again, we all have been reading the stories of the surging housing prices in the last couple of years, and a lot of people might be thinking, how am I going to come up with the money to purchase this property? But the cool thing is that if you do currently own real estate, which many of our listeners are going to be already owning real estate, you've been riding a bit of a wave with your own principal residence. And honestly, my wife and I, that's how we grew our portfolio. We didn't have millions of dollars to start with. The fact that we were able to buy a property 10 consecutive years was not because we had a boatload of cash to start with. We had a house that pretty much had no debt on it. And in our market, the house at the time was worth about $600,000. And had we done nothing, it would have appreciated over time. And now that same house is probably worth about double that, about $1.2 million. So we still would have seen a $600,000 appreciation in our real estate. But because we leveraged that house, and what we did was we got a line of credit and eventually even a mortgage against the house that was essentially paid off, but used the money to create down payments for the properties we started purchasing. That in itself gave us the 20% down, which was required in Canada to purchase the property. Then we leveraged the other 80% on in a mortgage. So essentially the 20% came from our house and the 80% came from the bank. So essentially that was 100% leveraged properties. And, for those that are, not great on math, that's not a lot of money to put down. And so, but the cool thing is every one of the properties that we purchased had the right market fundamentals, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, Mike. But secondly, they each covered their expenses and had a little bit of cash flow left over, even with 100% leverage. And so even if there is a market downturn like you experienced back in 07, 08, as long as the property is covering itself, even if I were to lose my job and not be able to take money towards my life towards the mortgage, that's okay. The property's covering itself. And that put me in a position where it's hard to fail. It really was hard to fail.
Yeah, because when you have time, I mean, yes, the real estate market can ebb and flow, and there's bound to be a couple of larger blips on the radar. But yeah, if you're looking out, 15, 20, 30, 40 years, it will pay off over time. I remember my parents telling me, what they first bought their house for. And you think like, oh my gosh, I can't believe houses were that cheap. And just imagine, fast forward 15 years when my kids are asking me what we bought our first home for, and they're gonna be like, I can't believe it, and so over time you're gonna win. And I think that's the key is you need to have a plan and figure out what if something were to go down or were to have a blip in the long-term radar, could you cover it? I mean, worst case scenario, if you've got equity in the property, you can always sell it. If something were to happen, or like you said, if you've got the cash flow, you just keep renting it out and put your head down, and over time it's going to work itself out.
Yeah, and one comment you made, which is sort of a common story, is that real estate values always go up, and I want to address that a little bit, because the answer is not always the case, and that's really what I like to focus on. And
Sure.
I have a chapter that that's chapter 3. It's called Legalized Insider Trading. And so in that chapter, we try to teach the reader to go beyond just sort of the assumptions that are out there in real estate, and to do a little bit more, understand the fundamentals. I always use the analogy that if I sit down at a poker table and I'm the worst person at the poker table, I don't want to sit at that poker table. Become a market expert, become an industry expert. And that doesn't mean across all the United States. It might not even be across all of Minnesota, for example.
Mm-hmm.
It might be
Right.
in one district of one city, and you just know that market better than anyone else. But the cool thing about real estate is although it doesn't always go up, if the fundamentals are pushing it up, it's going to go up. So things such as population increases, and that comes as a result of job increasing. So if you see a market where there's increased infrastructure, increased job market, that leads to an increase in population. The increase in population puts more pressure on the demand side of real estate. And so as a result, the reality is supply isn't able to match a city like Minneapolis that's growing by over 1% a year. They just can't match that. The land price is too much. The labor cost is too much. The building material, we all have heard the building materials are going up. So you can't build affordable housing. So as a result of that, the existing housing stock is just going to keep rising and rising and rising. So that's what I advocate so much, is to do a little bit of market research and find a market that's growing by leaps and bounds. There's some markets in Texas that are fantastic from that perspective. Interesting enough, a market that I kind of would be nervous to invest in right now is New York City, even though it's one of the greatest cities in the world. New York City has had declining population and declining jobs, and that's a scary thing if you want to be a real estate investor. So I would happily invest in the outskirts of Minneapolis for sure if I had that opportunity.
Yeah. And talking about that, so when I worked for my nonprofit before I got into real estate, I was in a lot of impoverished communities where, you think about out east in Pennsylvania, where it was, cities that were mining towns. Well, all of a sudden the mining dries up and all the jobs leave. And now you've got houses selling for, I lived in communities where decent houses were selling for $20,000. And this is 10 years ago, just because nobody wanted to, the supply was so large compared to the demand that the prices were way down. And so, yeah, as long as you're in communities that are continuing to grow, you're always going to see that demand. But yeah, if you turn and you look at a city like that, your investment play, if there is any play, is a cash flow play. It's not an appreciation play.
And that makes me nervous as well. And we'll talk about that, I guess,
Right.
if we have
Yeah.
time. But yeah, just because a property is cheap does not mean it's a good deal.
Yeah.
I would rather my investors purchase in a quality market and find a quality property in a quality market that attracts quality tenants, and then it becomes a very easy buy and hold. You could hold it for a long period of time, and it's the hold that builds the wealth, and that leads towards quality profits.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, that's what we're all here for. And as good as the cash flow can be on some of those discounted markets, I'll take the long-term appreciation of a market like Toronto or Minneapolis or El Paso, Texas. Like those are markets that are going to see like six-figure and seven-figure surges in value over our lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of wealth I want to build. And it's
And if
easy.
you even look, if you look at the cash flow of, let's just say $200, $300 per door per month, well, that's maybe $3,000, $2,000 to $3,000 a year. Well, if it appreciates at 4%, 6%, something like that, the money that you're going to make is going to way more than outweigh what your cash flow gain is. So it's nice to have both of those working in your favor, but the appreciation is the long-term benefit.
And the other thing that people don't take into consideration when they're investing in markets like the one you talked about in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Ohio and some of the Rust Belt markets is, the fact that, it's cool that you can buy a house for $20,000, but the reality is that it's quite likely that the last owner and the last three owners of that house didn't put any money into that home because it hasn't appreciated. So they don't want to sink any dollars into it. As a result,
Right.
there's a lot of deferred maintenance issues. And so if you come in there and you don't want to be a slumlord and you don't want to have low quality tenants, you're going to have to spend some real money to fix it up to the levels where at least it's habitable. And your cash flow for the next 5 years can go away really fast if you've got to sink $30,000-$40,000 into foundation and roofing and windows and furnace and air conditioner and blah blah blah. Before you know it, your cash flow is all gone.
Mhm.
Also, if it's in a market where pretty much all the tenants are out of work and maybe low credit scores, there's a good chance you're going to have to struggle to get your rents. And honestly, this life is like the goal is to make your investments boring so you can make your life exciting. Like that's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so you can have those 5 properties in a cheap town in Pennsylvania. Let me have one in the suburbs of Minneapolis that's going to have a little bit of cash flow and appreciate at 5% in the next couple of years per year. Like
Yeah.
that's the market I want to have.
Yeah, and I love in your bio it says, real estate should fund your life, not run your life.
Yeah.
And yeah, when you when you take the time to pick the right areas and pick the right properties, that's where the fun starts to happen versus heaping more and more problems on top of it. And I think that's why some people decide not to get into rental real estate, because it's the example that everybody gives of the 2 a.m. toilet breaking, or something like that. Well, they think there's more problems with this.
Yeah.
But the reality is you can hire a good property manager that can help you with that stuff. And you don't have to deal with the toilets at 2 a.m. if you don't want to. And when you pick the right property, there's meat on the bone to be able to make some of those decisions. So it's not, hey, if I own 10 properties in 10 years, I'm just running around fixing toilets at midnight every night.
Yeah.
You're finding great leverage and a great team of people to help you, so that it can really fund your life, not run your life.
In my success stories that I provided, I asked the question, how many hours per month do you dedicate on your real estate portfolio? And the people that had 5 properties or less were spending, in some cases, less than 5 hours a month on their portfolio. So an hour a week, basically. And that was not by luck. It was because of the quality properties right at the outset. When I often say, you should, before you find the property, you should try to decide on the tenant profile that you're looking for, and then find a property that will suit that tenant profile versus the other way around. Because at the end of the day, in a buy and hold, as I said already, it's the buy gets all the attention and all of the investment books. It's exciting. If I can make it on the buy, that's fantastic. But you know what? If I bought something in the MLS system at retail price and then held on to it for 15, 20 years, to your point from earlier, I'm pretty confident that if I sold it at retail 20 years from now, I'm going to do okay. And the key is to have that property so it's not taking over your life for those 20 years. And the reality is that when you get people with 700, 800 credit score with real jobs and real mentality that they're future homeowners that are now renting for whatever reason, and they're going to treat your property with respect. The reality is that we actually have to go to the tenants most of the time and ask if there's anything going on. They don't want to bother us. They're just happy. We treat them with respect. They treat us with respect. And yeah, everyone's, if you sit in a room with 10 realtors or 10 investors, they're going to all share their horror stories because that's the fun thing to do. But at the end of the day, you'll go a year or two without having one real issue in many cases with a portfolio of, I've got 12 current properties right now. We just aren't having a lot of issues. It just not.
I had a tenant that reached out to me. We had a water heater in this townhouse that went out a couple of months ago, and so he had texted me and said, "Hey, hope everything's going well. Sorry to bother you. Our water heater is out." And I'm thinking, bother me? You don't have hot water for a shower right now, and you think that you're being a bother,
Yeah.
and so that's where it was a simple phone call to a plumber. We had somebody out there, I think in 2 days, and it was fixed and it was taken care of. And so something like that, yeah, it doesn't take a lot of time to fix that. And yet at the same time, like you mentioned, I think sometimes he feels like he's bothering me by reaching out, and it's like, hey, I'm happily going to take care of that for you, because it's kind of at its life's end anyhow. I knew that those types of mechanical issues were going to be coming up, but yeah, he felt bad bothering me, and it's like, well, shoot, I want you to have hot water, so let's make sure you get some hot water.
Well, that's the kind of tenant you want to have. And then if you treat them with respect, you deal with it right away. When does a furnace go out? Usually on the coldest day of the year, right? And so we've had that happen, and I'm sure in Minnesota you've had that happen, or at least some of your friends have had it. We actually have a couple of block heaters that we have in our storage unit that are there for just such an emergency, because obviously we're not going to get the temperature up to 68 degrees or something like that, but at least it could be above 50. And so not only that, but it's good for us that pipes won't burst and such like that either. Right. And things like that, if it's going to take a day or so to fix something like that, the fact that we're being so incredibly proactive, it goes a long ways for the tenants, and they're not going to bother us with little things like we all heard about all the rent strikes that were happening across the United States and Canada for people that weren't paying during COVID. My tenant profile, and likely yours and many of my clients, we just didn't have that happen. Like, all of our people maintained their job, or even if they were struggling with money, the last thing they were going to try to miss was rent payments, because they realize that we're business people, and we treat them with respect and they treat us with respect, and that's the way it should be. And I don't want to have to be begging for my rent every month. That's not the way I want to be doing this. This is meant to be a way to fund your life and give me choices. And I'm 50, well, just turned 56, but at 55, I made the decision I could retire if I wanted to. And when I was 43, that just was not even in the cards. Like, I had not a lot of wealth, but just a decade worth of good decisions made a massive difference in my life. And now I have not only enough money for myself, but I'm going to have a legacy that I can pass on to my son and my niece and nephew, and I'll be able to help on their education. And like, these are the things that real estate has been able to provide for me. And I'm traveling anywhere I want to travel, assuming that things open up again. So.
Well, and I think another thing that I've heard from people that are investors too is a desire to help people, provide a great place to live, that you're going to be an attentive landlord. And there's a lot of value there, because there is a lot of landlords, aren't there, that aren't providing great value. And so even just providing a quality place, and you take care of it, you make sure it's kept up. If somebody's got an issue like the water heater, you take care of it. That's adding value for them too, because there's people that love renting, or there's people that, are still saving up for their house. And so to be able to provide that value and help people as a landlord is something else that you can do, and not feel like obviously you're in it for the money too, but you're also in it because you're wanting to help people and wanting to provide a good place for them to live.
Yeah, the perfect tenant is somebody who has intention of leaving your unit in 2 to 5 years, and most likely they're gonna leave not because they found another rental around the corner, but because they're actually looking to purchase a job transfer. we're just not losing tenants because of $50 here or $100 there. It's just not
Right.
happening. It's actually, in all honesty, we're seeing tenants that are staying too long because with the rents increasing as much as they have been, which is very common in markets where we see housing pricing increasing, we also see rents increasing as well. And so many of my rents are actually a little below market because we, in our market, have a form of rent control where we're not able to keep it up with market values. Your market may be different, I don't know. But so we're actually kind of falling behind on our market. We're still cash flowing, we're still doing well. We've got great tenants, they're all paying the rent, they're treating the house with respect. But if they move out, we're not going to cry over it because we'll find another really great person and collect a little bit more rent too. So
yeah. So what other things are important? We talked about the insider trading piece. What are some of the other concepts that you want to make sure that people understand?
Well, again, I kind of alluded to it because obviously we can't go into a lot of detail today, but I always like to tell people that it's not necessarily something that's going to take over your life. Although it's something that it's amazing how you'll start to network with other people. And actually, one thing I do want to share really quickly is if you are just getting started, it's likely that your circle of friends, your family and influence isn't quite possibly not in real estate investing, and that's okay. And I'm not saying you dump all your friends and family, but try to include in your circle people that are actually taking action, joining investing groups, local groups. Listening to this podcast is a great place to start, but going beyond that and actually talking to people who are actually doing action and starting to, by networking with some of those people, you'll really you'll start to, it'll feel more normal to take action and avoiding the negative influences that are sort of telling you to stay with the status quo. The status quo has got you to where you are right now, which is probably not terrible, but you can do a lot better. And this is a way, just with some minor modifications in your life, can drastically influence and change the outcome of where you're going to be in life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it comes down to having that future why out there, right? It's going to help drive your action today when you can see what it can become. If you could say, to somebody watching this or listening to this, that's 43 years old and think, okay, 10 plus years from now, I could be retired. A lot of people just don't even think that's possible to say, well, what if you took a little bit of extra time and you spent on, trying to figure out this real estate thing that you've always wanted to do? What it could mean from now is you can retire in 10 years versus what piles of money am I going to have to put away and invest in the stock market or, whatever that might be. Well, if you just find some great cash flowing properties that are appreciating and you do that a few times, boom, now 10 years later, you've got something completely different. And like you said, something that you never thought was going to be possible, 10 plus years ago. So,
well, there's a quote that from Bill Gates, which I like to, it's one of my favorite quotes, is people tend to overestimate what they can accomplish in 1 year and underestimate what they can accomplish in 10. It's amazing how many, times I go on these short-term diets and lose a few pounds and gain a few pounds but with a long-term mindset in health, you're going to do a lot better. And with regards to wealth building, the line that we were told when we were teenagers in our 20s about saving money and going into GI or into investment vehicles that are making 2% and 4% return and bonds and stuff like that, you were told a bunch of lies, basically. Leveraging your money and actually finding ways of getting safe returns with significant returns is a way to just jumpstart your wealth. And the aha moment for me came a few years ago, or more than a few years ago now, but when I realized that my 9-to-5 job that took 2,000 plus hours a year to accomplish paled in comparison to the wealth I made through my real estate earnings. And so I thought, holy crap, my houses are making more money than I am. And then it just got stupid, the difference between the two of them. And that's kind of neat when you have almost like a second or third income in your house, and the income is someone who's not actually working. And it got to the point where now that I'm 56, my part-time passive income is actually generating enough wealth that I've reached my financial freedom number where I don't need to work anymore. And I could just live off of my earnings and live a very comfortable life. I'm making, in the $15,000 to $20,000 a month range now from cash flow and other dividends and other residuals, which wouldn't even have been conceivable 15 years ago, just not even in the realm. So it's been pretty cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. And for those folks that want to learn more about you and learn more about your book, how can they do that?
Absolutely. And yeah, I really, regardless of where you're located, whether it's the United States or Canada or anywhere else in the world, a lot of the stuff I teach is more mindset and market fundamentals. And so it's universal. It's not relevant for just one region. And so my book again is Armchair Real Estate Millionaire, and conveniently enough, it's armchairrealestatemillionaire.com. And if you want to reach me, I'm at info@armchairrealestatemillionaire.com. And I really encourage you to pick up the book for the $20-25 that it costs you to get it. I really think that this could be a major point of difference in one's life. And it's interesting how real estate has changed so many people's lives. And I've seen it. We've had such an incredible success rate for ourselves and our clients and everyone we've spoken to. As long as you buy properly and you're dealing with quality people, you're going to do very well.
Yeah. And what we always tell our team is, there's two great times to plant a tree: 20 years ago and today, right? So make that decision today that, whether it's by the end of this year or within the next 12 months, I'm going to have my first rental property or whatever that is. You got to set a goal and you got to put a timeline on that. But yeah, you can be anywhere you want to be 5 years from now. And in your case, 10 years from now too, and look back. So it's about starting today. So what barrier is in your way today that you can get started? And your book obviously would be a great resource for people, because it is mindset. It's being okay taking the risk because you know what the reward is on the other side of it.
And it's nice to know that the risk is, and again, we talk about this a lot in the book about, we all talk about the term risk, and anytime you're putting money into an investment, there is an element of risk. But honestly, I think it's far more risky to put your money in a savings account where you're guaranteed to make 1% interest. That, in my mind, is the riskiest thing of all. So, because if let's say the inflation rate is 3%, by you putting it at 1 or 2%, you have 100% guaranteed yourself a loss. Right. And we even compare with banks and why they do leveraging at such low interest rates. And that's a story for another day. But the fact that they're willing to do that tells us that the banks, people that know a lot more about finances than you and I do, they think that real estate investing in certain markets is a very low risk investment. So really seriously think about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate your time, and best of luck to you in the future.
Thank you. Nice to meet you again.